all of us at some point in time have heard of or even seen some version of the quote unquote deck building template. But is it necessarily correct? Let's take a look. What is up, Commander players? My name is Matt and you're watching Top Commanders. So, on today's episode, I basically wanted to take a look at the so-called deck building template. Now, we've all heard of or seen this from somebody, being a commander-based article, or even some of the YouTube channels out there, Command Zone, Tulare Community College. There's been a number of people talk about the deck building template for Commander, and this basically just talks about the basis of building a Commander deck. But before I get too far into this, I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to start some kind of feud. I'm not saying that anybody's wrong necessarily or anything like that. This is more of I want to challenge people to do this after they've built a Commander deck as well, because this is something that I noticed with a personal Commander deck of mine. This is my Timna Crom Partner Commanders. It's a 4-color artifact-based deck, and it's not even built to be combo-y like Brea or anything. This is more of a aggressive artifact creature beat in the face kind of deck, that with enough synergies in the deck that can combo off, but it doesn't lean into that too much at all. But before we get into it too much, if you wish to support this channel, be sure to like, share, and subscribe as always. And if you wish to support this channel directly, be sure to visit patreon.com/topcommander. But with that out of the way, now, the deck building template that we're all used to seeing, it typically, it varies, but it typically looks something like this. 10 ramp cards, 10 draw cards, 10 removal, or between 8 and 10 removal, and 3 to 5 board wipes. That's pretty much the basis for what most Commander decks are supposed to be. Now, when building the deck, of course, you want to try to hit all these marks, right? Of course, you want your deck to work well. But then, when you look at some of these numbers, and then you look at some of the other cards that you add in to fill out the rest, go back, deconstruct the deck again based on removal, ramp, and draw, and board wipes, and everything like that. And then look at how different those numbers are. In fact, I will almost guarantee that those numbers are typically much higher than you would expect. So for instance, in my 4-color artifacts, I have a number of removal spells that I will typically consider to be the 10 removal. Now, this also depends, of course, do you count counter spells as single target removal? Because technically you are spending a card to take care of a card before it hits the stack. So counter spells, in a way, are removal. So in this deck, I have 4 counter spells. That's typically where I like to be, maybe 3 to 4 counter spells in each deck that runs blue, because counter spells are just good, and they're very good at stopping people from doing some really busted shenanigans to win the game. So protecting yourself from losing or protecting your win con is where counter spells come in handy. Now, I do understand that some playgroups don't like counter spells, but that's neither here nor there. That's not what we're talking about for the purposes of this video. So we have 4 counter spells, and then we have Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, a Disenchant, Utter End, Anguish Unmaking, Generous Gift. Now that is 10 instant speed single target removal. Now, on top of that, I also have the sorcery speed Feed the Swarm, because it's 2 mana and it gets rid of a creature or an enchantment. Basically what I did was, when Feed the Swarm came out, it was just really good. I bought up enough copies, so anything that I have that has black in it runs Feed the Swarm, because it's a really good piece of removal, even if it is sorcery speed, honestly. Okay, So we have those down, right? But now, when you look at some of the creatures that I run, Walking Ballista has an activated ability that can basically be a pinger, and I have a number of ways to bring it back and keep constantly using it. Now, yes, it can go combo off and kill people with Walking Ballista, but if you're just bringing it back with a Mirror Retriever and you replay it again and use it to ping something down, it's single target removal at that point. Same with Noxious Gearhulk. This is a 5/4 menace beat stick that on ETB destroys a creature. This can also be single target removal. As far as some of the lower CMC creatures, I do have Armix Filigree Thrasher. This is the new one from Commander Legends. When it attacks, you may discard a card. When you do, target creature defending player controls gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control plus the number of artifact cards in your graveyard. This can become single target removal on attacking by simply the fact that this is an artifact heavy deck. This deck, when Armix attacks, this deck can obviously, with his ability, hit a creature for -5, -5, -6, -6 very easily. So this can definitely be single target removal. Okay, now we've added more single target removal. Well, let's look at something in my land base. In this deck, I run Strip Mine and Wasteland, mainly because there are problematic lands like Glacial Chasm, or maybe a Voltron strategy that's going to give a creature double strike, or, there's a number of different utility lands, or even something as simple as a Gaia's Cradle. Those are problematic lands that can definitely swing the tide of a game very easily if you're not careful. So I understand that Rule 0, people don't like land destruction. But in my opinion, as far as Rule 0 goes, I believe that's more of, we don't like Armageddon, where it destroys all lands. So having something simple like a Strip Mine or a Wasteland to take care of problematic lands, why not, right? You want to be able to take care of problematic lands. So Strip Mine and Wasteland, that's 2 more single target removal. Boy, our number is increasing very quickly, isn't it? Also, in this deck, I run Sword of Fire and Ice. Now, the cool thing about Sword of Fire and Ice is it's mainly in here to give a couple of creatures just the right evasion to be able to swing in, deal combat damage, to trigger Temno the Weaver's ability to draw more cards. Also, Sword of Fire and Ice has triggered abilities. 1, lets you draw a card, and 2, lets you deal 2 damage to target creature or player. 2 damage to target creature or player. This can be single target removal. This can be creature removal. So Sword of Fire and Ice also falls under that category. But remember, it also said you can draw a card when you deal combat damage with Fire and Ice. So it also counts towards card draw. So now we're entering the realm of cards that do multiple things. Now let's look at another one of the Sword of series. Sword of Feast and Famine. You untap all your lands on damage, you untap all your lands, and then your opponent discards a card. Sword of Feast and Famine can be ramped because you're getting double use out of your lands. But now, I argue the fact that because your opponent has to discard a card, this can be maybe not necessarily card draw, but it is card advantage. Because you're getting rid of a card from your opponent's hand. They have 1 less card to use now. So, when it comes to card draw, for this deck in particular, a lot of these cards are more of card advantage. It's not necessarily a lot of cards that say draw cards on them. So now we have 2 cards for sure on card advantage. Well, before we carry on, let's go ahead and talk about another single target removal. Yes, there's more. Ugin the Ineffable is the War of the Spark Ugin. His static ability says colorless spells cost 2 less to cast. Well, that's ramp on him, right? +1, exile the top card of your library face down and look at it. Create a 2/2 spirit token. When that token leaves the battlefield, put the exiled card into your hand. So that's card draw. And then his -3 is destroy target permanent that's 1 or more colors. Well, that's single target removal, so he counts as all three. Boy. So now we have another piece of removal, another piece of ramp, and another piece of card draw. Also in card draw, let's take a look at Academy Ruins. This is card advantage in itself because it brings back an artifact from your grave on top of your library so you can reuse it. So this is card advantage. Sensei's Divining Top. Is it card draw? When you're combining it with something like Bolus's Citadel, absolutely. It is definitely card draw because it basically turns into a Necropotence kind of a feel. But otherwise, it's just card advantage because you get to filter through the top and things like that. Rhystic Study. This is a card draw card. You know, it's card draw and card advantage because your opponent has to spend mana to make sure that you're not drawing cards, or they're not spending the mana and you're drawing cards. So I feel like it is both. If they're spending the mana, it's at least card advantage, or at least mana advantage, because it is crimping them to be able to do more stuff if they keep paying for it. Joiro, Weatherlight Captain. Every time you cast an artifact, you draw a card. This basically turns all of your artifacts into cantrips. This is card advantage. This is card draw. Especially when you can reuse multiple artifacts over and over again. During the loop, this can turn in, Joiro can turn into drawing your whole deck. Sword of Light and Shadow has a trigger that you can bring a creature back from the grave to your hand. This is a form of card advantage. It's not necessarily card draw. It doesn't say draw a card, but it's still card advantage. Baleful Strix is a flying death toucher. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. This, in a way, I kind of like to consider this to be removal at the same time as card advantage, because you are getting a draw card on ETB. If Joiro's out, you're drawing an additional card because it's an artifact. You know, there's a lot of synergies that goes on that turns cantrips and card draw and card advantage, and it just, a lot of different things are happening all at once, right? Smuggler's Copter. When it attacks, you can discard a card, draw a card. This is more card advantage. Scrap Trawler and Mirror Retriever. These two are very similar. Basically, you get to recycle artifacts out of your grave and put them into your hand. This is a form of card advantage. Along with Silas Wren, Seeker Adept, and Tashar, Ancestor's Apostle. Now, Silas Wren lets you recast an artifact out of your graveyard. Tashar just brings back a 3 CMC or less creature from your graveyard to the battlefield whenever you cast an artifact, legend, or, you know, whenever you cast a historic spell. Sai, Master Thopterist. He's a token generator, but, you know, he also has the activated ability for 1 and a blue, sacrifice 2 artifacts, and you can draw a card. So he could be card draw. When you look at all the numbers and boil it all down, this deck ends up with like 20 pieces of removal, 17, 18 pieces of ramp, and look, I want you to do yourself a favor. Whenever you build a deck, of course, follow the template, and then when you fill in the rest of the stuff, go back, count everything, and then see how much those numbers drastically increase. Even when it comes to board wipes, the only one true board wipe in this deck is Toxic Deluge. That's a board wipe. That's all that is. It's a board wipe. But now, when you consider, I also run Cyclonic Rift. Now, Overloaded Cyclonic Rift is a one-sided board wipe, but if you don't overload it, it is single target removal. Your single target removal slot just went up just by having Cyclonic Rift. Vandal Blast, if you overload it, is a one-sided board wipe for artifacts, but if you don't, it's a single target removal. You see where I'm going with this. Ugin the Spirit Dragon, his plus is single target removal. His middle ability is a board wipe. And his ultimate, which, if you were able to pull off, good on you. Somebody should have had their priorities straight. But if you pull off the ultimate, he's definitely drawing cards. So he's covering multiple bases. Steel Hellkite. Now, Steel Hellkite's an interesting one, because he can be single target removal when you hit a player, but if you hit a player that's a token deck and you pay 0, you wipe out all tokens, so it is partially a board wipe at the same time. So when you're going through and you're looking at your deck, I want you to pull all of your cards and take a look again. Yes, you have your number of ramp pieces with mana rocks, mana dorks, stuff like that. It's things that are clearly ramp pieces. But how many ramp pieces do you have that you're not necessarily counting as full-on ramp? So when it comes to this template, is there a theory behind why some of the templates are 10, 10, 10, and 3 to 5? So, in my opinion, I feel like with the deck building template, when they're talking about 10 ramp cards, they're talking about 10 dedicated ramp. That's all that the card is there for. So, anything like Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, Land of War Elves, Fyndhorn Elves, these are each one piece of ramp. Rampant Growth, Farseek. That's just ramp. That's all that card's there for. And that's what I did with mine. This is my dedicated ramp slot. Now, I have 13 pieces of ramp because that's what I wanted. My deck is supposed to be fast and aggressive. It's an aggressive strategy that I'm not using tokens so much for the aggression as I am trying to get to bigger creatures like Noxious Gearhulk, Steel Hellkite, Wormcoil Engine, Mirror Battlesphere, Blightsteel Colossus. I want to hit people with big, beefy artifacts. That's what this deck is made for. But then, when you consider how many cards in this deck also can be used as ramp, Ashnod's Altar, Smothering Tithe, Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, Ugin the Ineffable, Sword of Feast and Famine, Saheeli the Gifted. These are cards that can be used as ramp cards, and they are. But are you necessarily counting them as your ramp? Because I don't... Tezzeret Master of the Bridge is a ramp card in itself, but I don't consider it ramp because it's 6 CMC. So is it based on CMC, or is it based on just, is this card dedicated to that? I feel like when it comes to the template, again, I feel like they're talking about, with the deck building template, it's 10 removal cards. We're talking about 10 10 instant speed interaction cards that are dedicated to nothing but removal. Source to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Disenchant, Utter End, Anguish Unmaking. All of these are dedicated removal spells. I don't think necessarily when they were talking about the template that they were talking about cards like Noxious Gearhulk. Is he a removal spell? Yes, but is he a dedicated removal spell? I mean, he can be, but he's also in here as a 5/4 menace beat stick to be able to slam into my opponents. So, yes and no. But I throw this out here as a challenge to anybody else that plays Commander that tries to follow this deck building template. Follow the deck building template, build the rest of the deck, and then go back through, look at all of the crossover cards, and then you go ahead and leave it in the comments below. What is your final count for each piece of removal, card draw, ramp, everything? And see how different it is from the template. Because I feel like there's a way that they're doing this and a way that it's kind of odd how the template is a specific kind of numbers. And of course they do say all the time that this also depends on the deck. Some decks will have more, some decks will have less of different things. But really go back through some of your decks and then look back at how many board wipes, how many single target removal, etc., and then find out how many of those you were like, yes, this is dedicated card draw, this is what I'm counting as card draw, this is what I'm counting as removal, this is what I'm counting as ramp, and then go back through and find your other cards in your deck that do ramp or whatever that are in different slots, and then go back and just see what the numbers are when you account for each of those. I will tell you, you will probably definitely be surprised, because when I found out that this deck has about 20 something pieces of removal, I was utterly shocked because I thought that my deck didn't interact that well. Come to find out, I was very much wrong. So I offer this as a challenge to everybody. Like I said, this was not to start a feud or call anybody wrong or anything like that. This is just more of, I want people to go back and look at their deck when they're done building it. Follow this template by all means, sure. But then when you're done, go back and take a look and see, and then, put cards into their respective slots, and then just, you can leave it down in the comments below and be like, hey, so I did this, and, wow, this is insane. I didn't think that this deck had this many removal. If you have a deck that, like, maybe you have something like a Silas Wren that has Death Touch or something, I would say go ahead and count that as removal. If the creature has removal, for instance, Baleful Strix, I consider him removal and card draw at the same time. But just plug in the numbers and then take a look and you tell me what you find. I'm willing to bet a lot of people are going to be a little bit surprised when they see these numbers. But go ahead and leave that in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think about this little brainstorm activity that I had. And I'll see you guys next video.